Is there great architecture near you, but you don't know it? Coming up on Architecture Codex.
Architecture Codex. If you want to see more, subscribe.
One of the problems with our society is that we hold celebrity in such high esteem. It is presumed if you are famous, it is because you are good, and the converse is also often believed, that if you are not famous, it must mean you are not good. This is a constant struggle for the artist, whether they are musicians, painters, or even architects who have creative genius but do not manage their popularity well. They may be asked to compromise their artistic principles or even their moral principles to the powers that be in order to achieve fame. And if you do become famous, everything you do apparently becomes some sort of holy relic. So when I find a great piece of architecture that is not famous, I am inclined to bring attention to it, even though I will be punished by the giant internet algorithm powers. And yet, I want you to see that great architecture is all around you. An example is St. Luke's Church in Danville, Ohio. I came upon the church while attending a wedding. St. Luke's Parish was established in 1820. Ohio had been a state since 1803, but it was still very much a frontier at the time. Edward Fenwick was born in Maryland in 1768 to a wealthy Catholic plantation family. As there were no Catholic colleges in America at the time, he went to study in Europe, where he became a Dominican priest. He returned to the U.S. in 1804, and while hoping to establish a Dominican monastery and college in Baltimore, instead he was sent by Bishop John Carroll to do missionary work west of the Appalachian Mountains, or Appalachian Mountains, depending upon where you're from. Back then, in the frontier, priests did not live in residence. There were so few, so they were all itinerant, traveling hundreds of miles from town to render sacraments to a people who may see a priest only once in 3 years. Later, the region was governed out of the newly formed Diocese of Bardstown, Kentucky in 1808, but the priest was still itinerant. By 1814, Father Fenwick had reached Sapp's settlement, which would become Danville. In 1820, a log cabin church was built, and in 1824, it was dedicated to St. Luke. In the interim, Father Fenwick was appointed bishop of the newly created Diocese of Cincinnati. By 1838, St. Luke's was building a bigger church. A generation later, and the parish outgrew that church. Father Francis Moitrier became pastor in 1876 and immediately began design and construction on a new church next door to that 1840s church. Father Moitrier was born in France and apparently had no formal architecture or construction training. But he was described as a natural, quote, genius in the fine arts and mechanics, end quote. It appears that Catholic missions would frequently send talented clergy who could spiritually and physically build their own church. Father Samuel Mazzucchelli in Wisconsin, Iowa, and Illinois was another example. From what I have seen of Father Moitrier's design, it is very consistent with Gothic revival of the 1800s, but he left no notes or drawings. The late 19th century was when architecture schools began to proliferate, but much of homespun design was still influenced by style books, printed collections of architecture designs. It is possible that he or his workers might have owned Richard Upjohn's Rural Architecture, first printed in 1852, or Asher Benjamin's The Practical House Carpenter from 1830. But I could find no direct images correlating the two. On the other hand, I did not have full access to either of those style books online. Regardless of whether he originated the design or was heavily influenced by style books, Father Moitrier's accomplishment was amazing. It is reported that he did much of the masonry, the plastering, and the frescoes. He spent $12,000, and the building was completed in about 1 year. In 1895, a fire devastated that church. 6 months later, they were laying the foundation for a new church. Strangely, even though this is almost the 20th century, there is no record of who the architect was. Talk about not being famous. There are similar churches that were built or renovated about the same time by architects and builders that we know. From these, one candidate emerges as the designer of St. Luke's. The firm of Joseph W. Yost and Frank L. Packard were partners from 1892 to 1899, and they were based out of Columbus, Ohio. Yost, like many architects of his day, learned his profession through apprenticeship and had a generally successful career. Packard also was an apprentice, but he also attended Ohio State and MIT, graduating in 1887. Together and separately, they produced a number of churches. As one of the closest and most qualified firms, they are likely candidates to have designed St. Luke's in Danville, and yet no record survives. Having designed a lot of Protestant churches, is it possible there is no record of them designing St. Luke's because it was a Catholic church? It is also possible that a collection of contractors could build the church without an architect, as was frequently done at this time. It is possible that they visited a nearby church and backwood engineered it. One candidate might be the 1849 St. Vincent de Paul Church in nearby Mount Vernon, Ohio. Written reports talk about the parishioners helping move materials and supporting professional bricklayers, but there still was no record of who designed the church. And yet the finesse of St. Luke's design pushes me to believe it was done by someone with more formal architectural training, like Yost or Packard. But then, I'm an architectural snob. What makes St. Luke's so special? The interpretation of Gothic proportions rendered in red brick shows a sophisticated understanding of Romantic Revival architecture. It is not a duplication, but a transformation of Gothic proportions executed in American 19th century materials, which is harder than a straight copy. The pointed arch is the Gothic brand which this church expresses, but it respects the Gothic proportions, height to span, and bulk between the arches. The entrance space is formed by locally quarried brown sandstone with the traditional 3 portals. This repeats the rusticated nature of Gothic church bases. From here, the facades transform smoothly into the brickwork above. The brick, probably manufactured in Dover, Ohio, and arriving on railroad cars, is used only in running bond. In traditional brick construction of this time, we might see soldier courses, Flemish bond, and arches articulating transitions. Here, the brownstone is used instead. You can see that in the lancet windows on the tower, which are captured under a recessed sandstone pointed arch. The main pointed arch above the rose window is not structurally essential and not common in European Gothic churches of the era, although you will find it at Rouen. It establishes the character of the church and divides the facade into regions, implying vertical proportions. The use of stepped piers, rendered in brick, would have been stone on original European Gothic churches, but here they are nicely capped at each step with sandstone. And on the top, there is the traditional gable facades with traditional triangular peaks and finials. Inside, the pointed arch groin vaults reinforce the Gothic nature of the church. St. Luke's being considerably shorter than large Gothic churches, the vaults spring from low on the walls and are not on tall columns. And the point of engagement has a capital but no column. This is a transformation of the medieval respond, as it is missing the engaged column. And the space is not subdivided into aisles. That might have been implied by the triple pointed arch doors on the front facade, but such interior columns were not necessary for the width of the church. This shows the architect was not inserting Gothic artifacts just to have them, but because they would serve a purpose. I have always thought that medieval Gothic churches were modern in the sense that they were form follows function. In this case, the form being cut stone, which has certain necessary attributes to it, and the function was to create tall, wide, open spaces. St. Luke's has the same kind of finesse and approach, even though its reach was not as grand. The inside also reinforces Gothic details in the wood niches behind the altar, at one time the original altar, and the side niches and the way the Stations of the Cross are nested into the architecture. Even the pointed arch stained glass windows almost fill the vault, repeating the original Gothic motivation to build the city of God, described in the book of Revelation as a city of light. These are not small holes bored into the wall. They are not diminished forms of the original Gothic intent. The church had important maintenance done to it in the mid-century. At the same time, they also made some modifications based on Vatican II directives. Records show that there was a constant effort to renew and restore church elements. This culminated in the bicentennial restoration, also lovingly done by the parishioners, which brought the church to modern standards of comfort. A bright color palette, restored paint on the wood statues, and the preservation of essential elements of the church. I am an architect, so I look at buildings, but it is obvious from looking at the building and other documents, including their bicentennial booklet, that the Catholic community at St. Luke's has always been a parish with dedicated and involved parishioners trying to live out the gospel. Through their leadership, both clergy and laity, they have created community first, from which all other things flow, including the architecture. It is a great reminder that we are the church. I'm Michael Molinelli, and this is Architecture Codex.